Good afternoon. I'm Bill Simpich, and I'm going to start by offering you a snapshot of a journalist named Kent Biffle, who was active with the Fort Worth Press. And we're going to discuss the Fort Worth Press as a separate newspaper and also as the Fort Worth and Dallas coverage of Oswald and things like Oswald in the 4 years before November 22nd, because you remember, he was a red defector, and that's the kind of man bites dog story that gets you headlines. So the way the story begins is that Oswald defected in the end of October 1959. And when it hit the press, the headline is Fort Worth Man asks red citizenship. Passport turned in at Moscow. And other headlines were like 20-year-old Marine to renounce citizenship with little quotes from Oswald. And then you will see, if you turn to the Fort Worth papers someday, a photo of a gentleman who looks like Oswald with a woman and a little girl all looking at the newspaper. The gentleman looks like Lee Oswald, but in fact, it's the best Lee Oswald double you could ever ask for. It's Robert Oswald, and that's his wife Veda and their daughter, with the headline, Brothers Turn to Reds Puzzles Fort Worth Man. These are examples of the press coverage that was being obtained. And the fella who wrote two articles in particular during this time of November is a man named Kent Biffle. He was an informant with the FBI a couple of years later in 61 on the mafia side of things, answering to Robert Barrett. And he wrote articles not just for the Fort Worth Press, but also the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Then later, we'll find him with the Dallas Morning News. Kent wrote an article on the 1st of November saying Fort Worther may become Russian, so he can write about experience. Then, in about the 16th of that month, he actually tried to place a three-way call to Lee Oswald in Moscow while his mother was hiding on the other end. And so the FBI taped it, wiretap, if you will. And in the stories, you'll see that Lee says, hello, hello, and then he hears his mother's voice and he flips and he hangs up on her. So the headline is Moscow phone went dead, turncoat hangs up on mother. And that word turncoat is highly charged. I saw it again and again in the stories. And the term itself, which was not unknown, but was popularized around the Oswald case by Kent Biffle. And Lee Oswald clipped Kent's story, and it can be found in his possessions. And he wrote about it when he wrote John Connolly asking for his discharge to be upgraded. So, very significant article. Fascinating information about this case during November 59 is I found one clip in the Star-Telegram actually stating that the remainder of this dispatch was held in censorship. It's kind of a overflow from the censorship of World War II, but it's still jarring to see a story about Oswald, or anybody for that matter, in 1959 being withheld for censorship. Kind of mind-boggling. So I'm going to step up the story now because Kent did write a story in 62 when Oswald came back. So it's not like he dropped the ball on him. And in fact, Marguerite tracked with Kent and used the Fort Worth Star-Telegram as a dropping off place for her mail and her phone calls in the 1960 period, which is quite amazing when you think about it. And it's not to say that Marguerite is some kind of spy. Rather, it's to say that Marguerite, who I have a lot of faith in as a witness, And I think she really got a bad rap as a woman and as an older woman and as a working class woman from even the research community, but especially, of course, from the press, who seized every opportunity to denigrate her. She was working very closely with Biffle. Biffle was paying her money to give him stories, and that's why she was so eager to work with him, because she was so poor. She was as poor as she could be, and she worked with a lot of prominent people taking care of their kids. She took care of the mayor of Arlington's kids, and she took care of the Fort Worth Star Telegram's publishers' kids, the Carters, Anton Carter Jr. And Mr. Carter was considered the dean of Fort Worth. Lee Oswald even went to his camp. It was called the Carter Camp. And she worked at Carter's house until 11 days before the 22nd of November. And I bring all this up to show just how prominent this defection of Lee Oswald was in Fort Worth and Dallas alike. Now, I want to close this portion with Mr. Biffle by the last days before November 22nd. And in particular, I want to focus on a quote from Tom Dillard, who worked for the Dallas Press. He was a photographer. His quote is this: "So at Love Field, everything went fine up to the point that the whole day became a great frustration for a photographic person. First thing, parades were usually handled with a flatbed truck for pool and certain selected photographic personnel to ride in front of the presidential car in presidential parades. Again, to ride in front of the presidential car in presidential parades. That was canceled at the last minute. We were put in Chevrolet convertibles to ride several cars back. I think we were about 6 cars back. Bob Jackson and I and a couple other boys were in this parade. This put us totally out of the picture. And I've got these photos, courtesy of Vince Palomara, from Mexico City and Nashville and a variety of other locales, all showing the president behind the photo cars. So the photo cars in front, and then the presidential cars follows, and you can see JFK waving to the crowd in all these other towns. But we don't have that photo in Dallas. Why not? It's because, in my opinion, the Secret Service fellow changed the order of the motorcade and put the press people in the back. And I say specifically so there wouldn't be good photos of the president getting shot up. Now, I've got another press clip. I'm going to just give you the headlines for these. This headline's from the Dallas Morning News, and it's November 15th, 1963. And it says, "Tight schedule. JFK motorcade seems unlikely." Go on to say, "Despite numerous requests, the Chamber of Commerce says prospects for a motorcade there aren't too bright. A tight schedule and security regulations stand in the way." Now, after that, I've got another clip. This time it's from Kent Biffle, 2 days later on the 17th. It says, "Incident-free day urged for JFK visit." And Kent's lead paragraph is, "Dallas leaders urged Saturday against any demonstrations or incidents during President Kennedy's visit here Friday." And sure enough, on November 19th, 2 days later, it was confirmed that not only would there be a motorcade, but they print right in black and white what the directions of the motorcade are going to be. The motorcade will then pass through downtown on Harwood and then west on Main, turning back on to Elm at Houston, and then out Stemmons Freeway. I mean, you're talking about press here and security. Here's another article the next day in the Dallas Morning News. This is the 20th of November. "Breakfast. Entry due by way of kitchen. President Kennedy is assured of a cook's tour prior to making his appearance Friday at a Hotel Texas breakfast in his honor." That was the 22nd morning of in Fort Worth. "The Secret Service, which guards the president, has laid out the most direct route for the Kennedys to take from the elevator to the grand ballroom. It's through the kitchen. Can you imagine telling the public what the entryway is going to be through the kitchen? Absolutely outrageous. At the same time, here's James Ewell. Now it's one day before November 22nd. Ewell is the police press liaison, and he's privy to all the inside skinny from the press, the kind of work, frankly, that Jerry Hill used to do. Ewell reports that more than 400 officers, including 40 state patrolmen, will be deployed for Friday's presidential visit in what police officials described Wednesday as the most elaborate security arrangements ever made here. And they get into all the details about 40 state officers, 13 Dallas County sheriff's officers, a police detail of 250, just spilling all the beans. Unbelievable. And sure enough, we now have access to the Secret Service lineup for the motorcade. And we know that the presidential limousine, I should say, was number 4, and that the national press camera car was about 6 back in number 10. And this main camera car, again, moved from the front to the back of the motorcade so JFK could not be photographed. Vince Palomara blames Floyd Boring in Washington for the Secret Service for this move, saying that Winston Lawson on the ground merely executed Boring's plan, which was spelled out 3 days before the assassination. And now, 4 cars beyond the camera car, all the way near the back, there's a local press pool car, and after the cameraman. And who's in there but none other than Kent Biffle himself and other local individuals who literally crashed the motorcade. As one of them said, they unofficially joined the motorcade at Love Field rather than having been a planned vehicle. And this allowed Biffle, by accident or design, to be right in front of the Texas School Book Depository within moments after the assassination. And what Biffle claims he did was he claims he ran to the grassy knoll because he thought shots might have come from there because people were running that way. And then he ran right back to the front door of the book depository, and then he ran inside the door. And a man who ran inside the door at supposedly the very same time as he was a photographer with a movie camera named Tom Allier, who's pretty well known among research community. And Allier claims, I ran upstairs with the Secret Service men. It boiled down to the 4th, 6th floor. They looked for the gun. I filmed 400 feet of film of the Secret Service men looking for the assassin, climbing over boxes, looking over rafters, and the actual finding of the gun. If you can believe it, the only 2 men who got inside the book depository beyond the 1st floor who were actually reporters were Tom Allier and Kent Biffle. And Kent and Tom were there for the finding of the shells and the finding of the Mannlicher Carno. And Allier filmed this. Allier threw the film out the window. Then most of his film was mysteriously destroyed. We just have tiny pieces of it left. And both, most interestingly, both Biffle's story and Allier's story were buried. Allier did not come forward and claim credit like any reporter usually would. Kent Biffle wrote an article, in fact, 2 articles on the 23rd of November with his name for the Dallas Morning News. And in neither one did he admit that he was up on the floor in the 22nd. Again, you'd think he and Allier would be touting this all over the world, and instead they kept it very much to themselves. And I question why. The article was about the assassin crouching and taking deadly aim, and I want to read a portion after Biffle gets into great detail about how 3 cartridges were found at the corner window, the cold drink bottle with the fried chicken, and the Mannlicher rifle found nearby. He quotes Truly, the superintendent. He cites Lumpkin using scores of firemen and policemen to search the building. All these details that only somebody on the scene would know. And then he cites an anonymous employee of the textbook firm, who I think is, in fact, Truly, stating, I've never seen this quote anywhere else. I don't know if you're interested in this, but one of the fellows who works here is gone. Can't find him anywhere. He's 23, about 5'9", weighs about 150 pounds. I'd have to check the payroll section to be sure, but I think he's been here a couple months. His name is Lee Oswald. And Biffle claims that he was there for a long period of time thereafter and left. And only after he left did he realize that Lee Oswald was the same person that was the focus of his articles and interactions with Marguerite 4 years earlier. I find that, frankly, impossible to believe. Now, as an aside, I want to say that there was many other individuals that were key in this as well. Bob Schaefer from CBS News fame, he worked for the Star Telegram. He drives Marguerite, as it turns out, to the police station. And Pierce Allman was camped out at the book depository, but never got past the first floor. Robert McNeil was writing for the Dallas Times-Herald. He was at the book depository, but never got past the first floor as well. And then he headed off to Parkland. His partner later on, Jim Lehrer, who also wrote for the Times-Herald, he heard the discussion not to use the bubble top, which was amazing. There's so much that can be said about the Dallas press and their various roles. But for today, my focus is on Biffle and his colleagues in the big picture, how they framed this story to kind of ruin what happened. Specifically, I want to call people's attention to people like Forrest Sorrells, who entered the building and said that he came upon a Negro janitor who hadn't seen anybody leave through that door. Sorrells asked for the manager and was shown to Mr. Truly. Sorrells asked that a list be prepared of the names and addresses for all the employees of the book depository. He was looking for potential witnesses and had no basis for suspecting an employee. Well, we know the story of the roll call, and I'm going to get there in just a moment. The fellow who ran the story of the roll call was Pat Ganaway. He was in charge of the Special Services Bureau, which was basically the intelligence wing of the Dallas police. And there was a description, this is Kate and Fonzie wrote about this back in 1971. A description of Oswald, for instance, went out over the police radio within 15 minutes after Kennedy was killed. Captain Ganaway, in charge of the police's Special Service Bureau, later explained that Oswald's description was broadcast because he was missing from a roll call of the book depository employees. He was the only one who didn't show up and couldn't be accounted for. And Gayton points out, most of us know, I think, that the facts are that there was no roll call, that 48 of the 75 employees were outside when the president was shot. And that Ganaway quote is picked up in the Dallas Morning News the next day. He was the only one who didn't show up and couldn't be accounted for. So again, 48 were outside at 12:30. 5 had not reported for work that day. Others left the building almost immediately upon hearing the shots. Many employees were not allowed to enter the building after the assassination, and thus were absent when the police search began. But Mr. Biffle, who had spent much of the afternoon in the building where he'd witnessed officers discovering the rifle, the shells, and more, he claimed that he saw 2 roll calls. He says at the second one at 2:30, everyone was there but Oswald. Oswald, of course, was already in custody by 2 o'clock. 73 FBI reports reveal 41 were in custody or had left by 2:30. So this is utter nonsense in his story from November 23rd. And Ganaway, in fact, with Revel, are party to the famous list of the names and addresses of the employees at the location where the Harvey Lee Oswald name comes up as first in line. And then there's all these check marks on that list, pointing out who he hasn't been able to interview yet. So this whole roll call business is utter and complete nonsense. There's a second story that Kent Biffle writes the same day saying suspected killer defected to Russia in 59. And I'm going to read the last two paragraphs of this incredibly detailed article, which state that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, founded in New York in 1960, is a group dedicated to supporting the government and policies of Cuban Premier Fidel Castro. The group announced its formation in a full-page ad in a New York newspaper. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee investigating the financing of the ad found that the money came from the Cuban mission to the United Nations. Dozens of very deep pieces of information pre-internet that the local columnist has in his article, one of, at least two, if not more, from that day, while neglecting to tell us he was on the scene that day. Biffle goes on by November 28th to write an incredibly detailed article about Oswald and his supposed acting alone that day. And it's so well written that I suspect it was the model for what's known as Commission Document 1, which was created about 10 days later by the FBI as its report on the assassination. I think it was one of the main documents that they relied on. And it, in turn, CD1 is the framework for nothing less than the Warren Report itself. As many of us know, the FBI investigation was virtually what was rubber stamped by the Warren Commission. They did very little writing of their own. So the Kent Biffle story, I ask it this way. Was he witting or unwitting? Was he simply given all these leads and told to shut up and your career will be much better, and he basically was a cover-up participant? Or is it possible that he was even part of the setup itself? More to discover, but Biffle has not gotten the focus he deserves. He is one of the many people, of a dozen or more, I'd say, that I would consider persons of interest in the assassination of the president. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. May I ask a couple of quick things, touch upon a couple of quick things with you?
Sure. You like the story?
Yes.
Had you ever heard it before?
I've heard elements of it. News to me that Biffle and Aliyah referred to Secret Service during the search.
I had never seen that till just a few weeks ago. I found that almost by accident.
And I've never heard that most of Aliyah's film was accidentally destroyed or went missing.
Yes. Destroyed.
Great.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. When do we think that Kent Biffle is drawing attention to himself by making the connection that this figure, Lee Oswald, is the same person that he was focused upon sometime earlier in relation to the Marguerite Oswald angle?
Biffle doesn't talk about his connection with Oswald for decades.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that.
No, he never, why isn't he touting himself? This is kind of what one of the things I wanted to explore. The biggest reason I have a hard time believing that Biffle was part of the setup for the hit was the fact that he worked with Oswald's family so closely in 59 and 60. It's stunning to me that nobody found this before me. The person, of course, who led me sort of towards it was Peter Dale Scott, who couldn't understand why Marguerite was reporting to the Star Telegram all this, getting her mail there and shit. And that's what led me to it. I was like, Jesus Christ. You go through those early Fort Worth newspapers, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, but the part that I really am glad we're waxing about is the part I really don't understand is why in the world wouldn't Biffle try to make his career on the fact that he knew Oswald back in 59?
Exact the way Pamela or Priscilla McMillan did.
Right. That kind of notoriety vaults your career.
It draws attention to itself as arguably inexplicable. It seems perverse.
Yeah, and he didn't do it on day one, and he didn't do it on day seven, and he didn't do it till year 20, and even then he lowballed it.
Yeah, astounding.
So anyway, I mean, for like a year, I was like, this guy's part of the hit. But
Uh,
now I'm getting more nuance. I'm like, I'm not convinced he's part of the hit. I think he was being coached by people who were part of the hit.
that's very plausible.
Yeah, because why else are they telling him to shut up? It makes no sense for him to be shutting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for participating.
See you in a bit.